The wind howled through the cracked neon sign of a forgotten roadside diner, its flickering glow the only light for miles. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and cold grease hung in the air as the last embers of an empty night faded away. Behind the counter stood a tired black man, hands rough, eyes heavy, apron stained from years of trying to keep his small world afloat. Outside, snow swirled like ash, and from that storm came the low hum of a motorcycle that shouldn't have been running in weather like this. The door creaked open, and in stumbled a man half frozen, desperate, and broke. The diner owner didn't ask who he was or why he came, just reached for a pot of soup that had been simmering for hours. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness, in the middle of nowhere, on the coldest night of the year, would change his life forever. For nearly 2 decades, Henry Walker had opened the doors of his small roadside diner before dawn, no matter how cold, no matter how empty. The place had once been his dream, a symbol of hard work, of dignity carved from years of struggle, but lately it felt more like a battle he was slowly losing. The regulars had stopped coming when the new interstate opened. Passing truckers no longer took the old road that led to his door. Some nights, he made less than the cost of keeping the lights on. Yet every morning he brewed a fresh pot of coffee, wiped the counter clean, and waited. The diner was more than a business. It was a piece of his past. His late wife, Ruth, had helped him build it when they were young. Every detail, from the faded red stools to the checkered curtains, still carried her touch. Henry often caught himself talking to her picture hung by the register, whispering promises that things would turn around. But deep down, he feared the world had moved on and left him behind. That night, the storm was worse than any he'd seen in years. The road outside was buried under white silence, and the diner's heater rattled like it might give out any minute. Henry thought about closing early, but something, maybe habit, maybe faith, kept him standing behind that counter. Then, through the curtain of snow, he saw a faint headlight fighting its way down the road. At first, he thought it was a trick of the wind. But when the sound of a struggling engine grew closer, Henry's pulse quickened. Whoever was out there shouldn't have been. No one sane rode through a storm like this. Still, Henry stepped out from behind the counter, ready, because no matter what, he couldn't turn anyone away from the light of his diner. The door burst open with a violent gust, slamming against the wall as snow scattered across the diner floor. The man who stumbled in looked more like a shadow than a traveler, his face hidden behind frost and exhaustion, his jacket stiff with ice. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of the coffee machine and the wind clawing at the windows. Then Henry moved. Slowly, quietly, he grabbed a towel and handed it over, his eyes steady and kind. The biker took it without a word, shivering so hard the towel almost slipped from his hands. Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He could read the story written on the man's face, the tiredness that didn't come from the road alone. Henry poured a cup of hot coffee, slid it across the counter, and ladled a bowl of soup from the pot that had been simmering all evening. The biker hesitated, eyes darting toward the no credit sign taped beside the register. Henry caught the look and shook his head. "Eat," he said softly. "It's on the house." The biker's eyes flickered with confusion, then something close to shame. He ate slowly, as if every spoonful thawed something more profound than his frozen hands. The silence between them grew heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 2 men, strangers bound by weariness, shared warmth in a world that had grown cold in more ways than one, but not everyone saw kindness the same way. As dawn crept in, headlights flashed through the window, cutting across the diner floor. 2 local deputies stepped in, brushing snow from their coats. Their eyes went straight to the biker, then to Henry. One smirked. The other didn't bother to hide his suspicion. "Everything all right here?" one asked, his tone sharp, testing. Henry nodded calmly, but he could feel the weight of their stare. The diner, once a haven from the storm, suddenly felt smaller and colder. He didn't know it yet, but this simple act of feeding a stranger had just set something much bigger in motion, something that would test the limits of his compassion and the quiet strength he'd carried his whole life. The deputy's questions started routine. where the biker came from, where he was headed, but quickly turned sharp, laced with doubt and quiet accusation. The biker, still shaking, couldn't give them straight answers. His wallet was empty, his license expired, his story full of holes. To the officers, that was all they needed. One reached for his radio, muttering something about trouble on the road. Henry's chest tightened. He could see the fear in the biker's eyes. The same kind of fear he'd seen before. Fear of judgment, of assumptions that ran deeper than truth. "Sir, you can't protect him," one deputy said, his hand resting on his holster. The other reached for the biker's arm. Instinct took over. Henry stepped forward, placing himself between them. His voice was calm but unshakable. "He's done nothing wrong," he said. "He's just cold." The deputy's glare hardened. "Then why defend him?" Henry didn't answer, because deep down he knew why. He'd lived long enough to recognize injustice even when it hid behind a badge. The silence cracked like thunder. The tension in that diner was thicker than the smoke from the old heater. For a second, it seemed like everything, years of struggle, exhaustion, quiet dignity, came crashing down into that one moment. The deputy's patience broke first. He grabbed the biker, pulling him off the stool. The man stumbled, nearly collapsing, soup spilling across the counter. Henry's hand clenched, but he didn't move. He knew the cost of defiance. Still, something inside him refused to stay silent. "Enough," he said. Just one word, quiet but firm. It cut through the room. The deputy froze, startled by the power in Henry's voice. For a long, trembling moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the storm outside. Then, without another word, the officers released the biker, muttered something about not worth the trouble, and left. The door slammed shut behind them, the neon open sign flickering weakly in their wake. Henry stood there, his heart pounding. The biker sat trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The diner smelled of spilled soup and burnt coffee, but beneath it lingered something more substantial. A sense of fragile humanity, of quiet resistance that no storm could wash away. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. In that silence, something changed. Forever. The storm passed by morning, leaving a fragile peace draped over the diner like a blanket of white. The roads glistened under the rising sun, and for the first time in hours, the world outside seemed still. Henry poured 2 fresh cups of coffee, one for himself and one for the stranger who had fallen asleep by the counter. The biker looked different now, less lost, more alive. The color had returned to his face, and in his eyes, there was something that hadn't been there before. Gratitude mixed with quiet disbelief. When he finally stood, he reached into his jacket, but Henry stopped him. "No charge," he said gently. "Just pay it forward." The biker nodded, unable to find the words. He left a torn patch from his jacket on the counter, a symbol of the road, of struggle, of something unfinished, and stepped back into the cold morning. Henry watched him disappear down the road until he was nothing but a dot against the horizon. Then he turned off the coffee pot, wiped the counter, and went back to work, same as always. Weeks passed. Life didn't change overnight. The days were still long, the diner still quiet. But one afternoon, a convoy of motorcycles roared up the old highway. Dozens of riders parked outside, their engines humming in unison. They filled every seat, ordering food, coffee, and pie, laughing like they'd known Henry forever. And when he asked what brought them, one rider smiled and said, "We heard about what you did for one of ours." The story had spread about the poor black diner owner who opened his doors to a man no one else would help. Donations followed, customers returned, and for the first time in years, the diner felt alive again. Henry never sought recognition. He just kept serving, quiet and humble, his heart steady as ever, because deep down he knew the truth. Kindness doesn't ask who deserves it. It just gives, even when the world doesn't. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the diner windows gold, Henry whispered to himself, Ruth would have liked this. Sometimes, a single act of compassion can outlast the storm and change a life in ways we never expect. If a single act of kindness can change a life forever, what's stopping us from showing it more often?